Welcome and thank you for joining us on the 2020 webinar, Emergency Preparedness and Response, COVID-19 and the Arts Ecosystem. I'm Sherilyn Seeley, Program Manager for Grantmakers in the Arts. The arts and culture sectors are seeing the negative impacts from strategies of social distancing and limiting travels in the midst of the coronavirus situation. However, we are curious about a few things. What should funders be thinking about related to how they should be supporting grantees? What's the long-term strategy for resiliency? On this webinar, we will hear from those who have already started to repurpose their grants, become fundraising campaigns, and those who have experience with emergency responses for arts and culture communities when unexpected events occur like this one. We look forward to hearing from DéLana R.A. Dameron, artist and founder, Red Olive Creative Consulting and Black Art Futures Fund, Randy Engstrom, Director of the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, James Hafferman, Deputy Director of CERF+, Tanya Gulliver-Garcia, Assistant Director of Major Initiatives for the Center of Disaster Philanthropy, Aden Packer, Executive Director of the Howard Gilman Foundation, Mark Rossier, the Director of Grants at the New York Foundation for the Arts, Strokosch, President and CEO of the National Performance Network, Torres, President and CEO of Grantmakers in the Arts, Wong, Director of Arts and Creativity at the Barr Foundation, and Yoon, the Senior Program Officer of Arts at the Wallace Foundation and the co-chair of the New York chapter of the Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in Philanthropy. We're glad to have them joining us today. At the very end of the presentation, I will be joining to facilitate a Q&A. With that, I will turn it over to our presenters. Welcome all. Eddie, why don't you get us started?
Thank you, Sherilyn. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good.
Yep,
So first off, I want to thank you, Sherilyn, for organizing this webinar so quickly. Really outstanding as always. I want to thank our Vice President and Director of Programs, the incomparable Nadia Alopta, and I'd like to thank Steve Klein and Carmen Gracia-Diaz for all the work they've put into this. I especially want to thank all of our presenters for participating on such short notice. I'd like to thank HowlRound for streaming and captioning. Thank you, VJ Matthew, and all the rest of you. Now, obviously, the requirements of engaging in physical social distancing and of limiting travel are resulting in canceled or postponed performances and events, declines in ticket revenues, and artists losing income. Now, among our biggest worries are obviously the residents, the children, the families that cultural organizations serve, their enrichment and their engagement. Many organizations are being unbelievably creative right now about reaching out to their communities with activities, particularly moving programming into the online space. But we know this will require increased capacity building and funding over time. Our other largest concern is keeping artists employed. Many organizations are still committed to paying their artists. This is fantastic. This is essential. Now, some organizations are no longer paying their performers for canceled productions. They're triggering force majeure in their contracts. At Grantmakers in the Arts, central to our principles of capitalization is making sure that cultural workers are treated as workers who deserve to get paid. And we'll talk about this some more throughout this webinar. Now, obviously, Congress has passed an $8.3 billion bill, and we're going to see more packages continue to be rolled out. Now, to clarify the paid leave, the emergency family leave is provided by employers who are then provided 100% tax credits to offset wages paid. This helps small businesses pay for salaries, but nonprofits are eligible for this as well. In the future, what's coming our way is payroll tax deductions. This is hugely important because this is one of the biggest expenses for nonprofit organizations. As these kinds of bills continue to be rolled out, we'll continue to keep you updated, and we continue, as does the larger cultural community, to advocate for arts organizations and for artists. Among the things we're advocating for is obviously a robust schedule of payroll tax credits, but also advocacy providing an above-the-line or universal charitable deduction for contributions to the end of 2021. This is to encourage continued philanthropic giving, even as the markets are roiled. Now, talking to our members, we've been asking, obviously our members are all grant makers, so we've been asking what are the most common requests that artists and organizations are communicating. And it just comes down to flexibility. It comes down to, in terms of, we're going to talk about two things today. We're going to talk about the flexibility of the money that's out there and emergency funding. We know that emergency funding is on the way, but we also know that money is already out there in the field. One of the things that we try to impress upon people with our capitalization work is that money needs to be sufficiently flexible for organizations to be resilient. And so right now we're seeing members increasingly make the money that's out there in the field flexible, loosening restrictions or eliminating restrictions, timelines, outcome schedules, reporting schedules. This strategy is being widely embraced. I've not heard of any funder that's not loosening restrictions on current grants. Now, this obviously, there's a range from marginal flexibility to radical flexibility. But nonetheless, we're seeing funders really step up in the spirit of support, going above and beyond. It's really been inspiring. Now, obviously, when it comes to emergency funding, what's most essential is that this be as easy as possible to access. One member articulated that emergency funding is trust-based philanthropy in action. Just get the money out the door with as little red tape as possible, and not just to cut red tape for applicants, whether they're organizations or artists, but to make sure that we inspire our colleagues and peers to do likewise. Also, the issue of grants to artist-driven projects is essential, particularly as organizations and artists move their work online. Now, some of us are supporting organizations, some are supporting artists, and some are supporting artists through organizations. In terms of the sources of money, these monies are coming out of, in some instances, other grant-making pools, so those other monies won't go out the door. But in some instances, this completely evens out. For instance, touring support right now should start becoming general operating support because people can't tour the way they once did. They can't travel the way they once did, and they can't gather the way they once did. Some private foundations will pull money out of their investment corpus. Again, we think this is bold, and this is a moment that requires bold action. When we panic, we close our minds. This is worse than just not thinking outside of the box and not thinking quickly. But sometimes we're seeing racialized communities being scapegoated and targeted. We're really appreciative of the work that's coming out of Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders in philanthropy, and we're really excited that we have Christine Yoon from the Wallace Foundation here as a representative. They, for instance, inspired the Nellie Mae Education Foundation to create a fund called Rapid Response, Racism is a Virus Too, that responds to xenophobia and bias against Asian American communities. What we're also seeing is the desire for collaboration. What we've gotten at Grantmakers in the Arts is requests to be connected to one another and to find out what others are doing for the sake of collaboration and adaptation. That's why we're all here together like this. Now, this is a crisis moment, and the effects of this are going to last. But the most essential thing is that we look at this moment as an opportunity to make sure that we build this field back more resilient than it was before. Now, we've exceeded capacity this year in response to requests for our capitalization workshop, and the ugly irony is we've had to cancel a bunch of these workshops because of COVID-19. Now, providing flexible funding is central to what we teach as responsive capitalization of artists and organizations. General operating support that pays for overhead, that pays for salaries is necessary. Funding for operating reserves is necessary. We have an article in the GIA Reader that just came out a little while ago that explains that as we've recovered from the Great Recession, organizations have progressively moved their liquid resources into facilities and other fixed assets. Their endowments have expanded along with the financial markets. In other words, many have locked up their limited liquid capital, leaving leaders to struggle to manage their organizations. Now, this is not cultural organizations' fault, certainly not exclusively. Too many boards and donors continue to believe the myth that scale equals success, and that fixed assets lend stability. The field is too seldom funding cultural organizations to save like every other kind of business. Without overhead and operating reserves, we see the kind of vulnerability that we're experiencing. This crisis has to force us to change to build the field and the future that we want. First, we must provide immediately help, and that's the focus of our discussion today. So welcome, I'm glad you're all here. Sherilyn.
Thank you, Eddie. All right, let's keep going. Go ahead, Tanya.
Hi, thanks everyone. Center for Disaster Philanthropy is an organization that works to make disaster giving more effective. And we do that by consulting, education, and grant making. So I'm glad to be here to share some of our lessons today. So first of all funders are disaster funders, and I think this pandemic is going to teach us that more than any other disaster that we've ever had before. This is a time when any funder, no matter what they normally fund, needs to step up and needs to think about how to make contributions to support folks through this disaster. As Eddie said, being flexible is really important, and flexibility both in the grants you've already given and in giving new grants. That also means reducing the requirements for reporting, reducing, don't have folks do extensive evaluation. We want to get money out the door and into the hands of people as soon as possible. This is a new way of doing grant making, hopefully temporary as we deal with the next month to 18 months of this disaster. If you're going to look at granting extra, start from your smallest organization and work your way up to the biggest. $10,000 for a very small arts organization might be 25% of their budget. But for MoMA, that's a drop in the bucket. Now is also the time to spend that rainy day fund. If you're an organization that typically spends 5% of your assets, can you spend 6 or 7 or 10? This is the moment you've been waiting for and that you've been saving that money for. But we still want folks to be planful. And the expression goes around, this is a marathon, not a sprint. That means that it's going to be a long run. It doesn't mean you don't have to work to get money out the door and get money out the door fast. But it means that you need to think about and strategize how you're giving the money. What can you give now? What can you give in 3 months, in 6 months, in a year? And then, as Eddie touched on a little bit, advocating with your local, state, and federal politicians for laws and policies to protect impacted individuals, not just artists, but the whole community. If we see significant job losses, significant housing losses, starving and struggling, they're not going to look at the arts as a solution when they start getting back on their feet. They're going to be too busy paying the bills that they've had to incur during this time. One of the things that's been super exciting that I've seen is the use of videos and remote curriculum. And this is a great way to still continue to make grants and give money to individual artists and arts organizations. Hire them now to do that remote learning. I'm based in New Orleans. Our schools are shut down. They are not reopening this year. But we still want to make sure that our kids aren't losing access to arts education, and parents are still trying to make sure that their kids get some information, get some learning. So figure out how you can do that kind of grant making. And then, finally, I think as grant makers, sometimes we get bogged down in process, in all our forms and evaluation and criteria, but be as creative in grant making as the artists you support are in their individual mediums. Artists are always one of the solutions after a disaster to help with recovery, but they're also going to be the solution that helps get us through this. CDP, as I mentioned, does a lot of education. We have a playbook on our website at disasterphilanthropy.org, which we would love to have you check out. It has a section on the arts and how funders can do better in disaster grant making after and during a disaster. So good luck, and I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Good afternoon. This is James Hafferman, Deputy Director at CERF Plus. Thank you, everyone, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here today. CERF Plus is a national artist service organization that is dedicated to helping artists build strong and resilient careers, and we're focused on emergency readiness, response, and recovery. CERF Plus is the go-to organization for studio-based artists on readiness with information, resources, and education programs. We also advocate for the needs of artists, working with the general emergency management community and the federal government to ensure that their programs include artists and other self-employed workers. CERF Plus has, and its founding mission is, an emergency relief fund for artists working in craft disciplines facing career-threatening emergencies. And I think some of the things I'm going to talk about will be said again throughout this webinar, but first, I would say let's recognize that this is a sprint and a marathon. We realize that we are only at the beginning of this unprecedented crisis, and we need to prepare to address the needs of artists over the long haul. The situation is unique in that, unlike hurricanes or other natural disasters, where those are mostly localized, everyone, all of our communities and artists are being directly impacted in one way or another in their health, careers, and livelihoods. Unlike our experience in Puerto Rico with Hurricane Maria or other disasters, we can't be on the ground in person talking and coordinating with our partners, which was such a key component of CERF Plus's recovery efforts there. This requires a different response model and one that is nimble and strategic with an immediate and mid to long-term vision and resources to match throughout that long cycle. We also know that artists need cash now. We know that this is causing immediate financial impact. According to FEMA, following a disaster, 90% of small businesses fail within a year unless they can resume operations in 5 days. Artists are creating workarounds and leveraging their online environment to attract audiences, and that is promising. However, the constraints of the financial reality taking hold, it simply will not be enough. What is needed now is immediate cash relief so people can pay groceries, housing, medical care, etc. This is a stopgap measure and will not lead to sustainability and resiliency. So as a community, we need to find a way to develop a collective and longer-term approach to supporting artists throughout and beyond this crisis. Also addressing issues of equity. With so many organizations creating broad-reaching artist relief funds, some artists will have more access to relief funds than others. This creates and exacerbates systematic disparities for artists who already are systematically disadvantaged. And resource-rich areas with availability of strong leaders and organized communities of support have an advantage, and this can create and exacerbate inherent inequalities in our collective system of relief distribution. Additionally, the technological component of this immediate and unplanned shift to virtual engagement of communities of support will leave some artists behind. While crowdfunding and GoFundMe campaigns may be easy to execute for some, for others who live in rural communities, lack access to large networks or even reliable high-speed internet, this poses a serious challenge. Further, as the scramble for support commences, organizations need to address equity in terms of the funds they have available. A first-come, first-served model can leave artists and small organizations and collectives behind, or result in them needing to wait weeks or months until the next campaign can support another round of grants. In CERF Plus's many years of experience providing grants, we know that artists don't always have the skills or lack the organization that will facilitate their ability to best advocate for themselves in a grant application. So it's especially important right now that we be mindful that crises often have a disproportionate and inequitable impact, and our values of equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility should guide us all as we respond to this evolving situation. The fourth point is collaboration. There's been an outpouring of it, sharing resources, information in recent days, and that has been incredibly helpful and also heartening. As a community of grant makers, we need your support of that collaboration going forward, and also support for mobilizing collective resources quickly and efficiently. Additionally, a common application model or pooled funds that can be distributed to ease the burden of organizations scrambling to raise funds, help facilitate collective data collection and aggregation, or support coordinating combined efforts on advocacy to ensure that relief packages from the government are distributed equitably across the arts sector. Flexibility is key. With the realities from this pandemic changing every day and so many artists, so many unknowns in the future, it is essential that organizations have the flexibility to ensure they can effectively and strategically respond to the evolving situation. Not only will relief funds for individuals across the sector be a priority, but organizations are taking immense steps to respond, and they may require resources for advanced technology, consultants, staff, and ensure their own financial health. This means core operating support and unrestricted support is essential. Furthermore, right now, donors are rising to the occasion. However, with predictions of unemployment levels and volatile financial markets, we don't know how this is going to affect donor giving in the mid to long-term frame. For those of us who rely on individual donors, earned income, and fundraising events, this will cause serious financial threats to organizations and the communities we serve. The last point, in the long term, we need to make a commitment to readiness. Pandemics by no means are a new threat to our society, but this is the first test of preparedness in modern history at this scale. And it's not an easy sell to the individual or to funders. However, we see more than ever that investing in it over the long term will help our artists, communities, and arts organizations build the resiliency they need. Inevitably, there will be lessons learned from all this. The unprecedented nature of this particular emergency will require that we all in some ways rethink our models, our modes of communication, coordination, and most of all, collaboration, which will require a commitment to readiness and resources to do that. Thank you.
All right, San, you can take it away.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Sansan. I'm at Barr Foundation. We're based in Boston, and the arts program serves Massachusetts. We also have some New England and national initiatives. Like many of you, we've been trying to move quickly in response to COVID-19, but even then, it feels too slow. So first, I want to express my appreciation to all of you for the work you're doing in your communities at this challenging time, and encourage you to take care of yourselves. I want to share some actions and ideas that we've deployed, and I'm looking forward to hearing your ideas. Open lines of communication. Early on, we initiated communications with our grantees, sending out resource lists around emergency preparedness. We invited people to be in contact with us, and we also hosted a series of webinars and a series of open conference calls. We're using the Communication Network's guidance around crisis communications. These guidelines are pretty simple and easy to use. They include to be brief and direct, to lead with the news, focus on facts, acknowledge what you don't know and what's unknown, and to be consistent with the cadence of your messages. Ultimately, you don't want people to wonder where you disappeared to. Supporting grantee partners. We need to be compassionate, calm, kind, and patient with our grantees and partners. We're finding that our organizations are trying to consume all the information they can. There's so much information out there, and we're finding that people are getting overwhelmed. Some are needing financial planning tools. Some need that compassionate sounding board to make the hard decisions about what, when to cut. And some need practice to get ready for that difficult board conversation. So the combination of increased flexibility around grants and reporting, coupled with customized expert advice, has been much appreciated. With smaller organizations, they may not have the cash reserves to keep their doors open. We're helping them assess their cash flow. Can they stay open 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? Can we buy them enough time to get plans in place and for them to talk with their donors and their community? This is where mitigation funds might be targeted. Creating response and recovery funds with an equity lens. At Barr, we reviewed our 2020 budget and deferred new initiatives and grants in order to create a pool of funds for mitigation and recovery. As we're creating priorities for recovery, we're trying to appropriately size our response with an equity lens. Some of our considerations include smaller organizations that may not have the reserves to weather this period. Vulnerable communities that have lacked historic investment. Organizations that may be much loved with lots of social capital, but their communities don't have those deep financial pockets for sizable recovery capital. We're looking at places where there are fewer philanthropic resources where we can help and step in. And because we're statewide, we acknowledge that we don't know all the communities deeply. We need to work with partners who are trusted by their communities and who know where interventions will be most effective. We need to be ready to apply this equity lens as we develop the medium and long term. Coordinating efforts. We've been working with the City of Boston to hire a coordinator to help the Chief of Arts and Culture. The authority figure of local government is super critical right now. This coordinator serves as central point person for the community and frees up the chief to focus and coordinate with other city departments. Our advocacy organizations are getting those immediate impact numbers to legislators so that arts can be included in relief packages. We're also trying to understand what are the potential medium and long-term impacts on the arts sector. Our service organizations are coming together to coordinate data, analysis, and case-making. Lastly, how can we use this crisis moment as an opportunity to build a stronger arts sector? In addition to funding artists and organizations, we might see opportunities to build sector infrastructure, like our advocacy organizations, networks, collaboration muscle. So keeping our eye on the future is helping to guide all of our decisions at Barr. On that note, I want to end and express my gratitude for GIA for pulling us together, and I hope that through this crisis, we grow even stronger as a funding community. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mark Rossier. I'm the Director of Grants at the New York Foundation for the Arts, and I will speak based on experiences we had when we administered a fund after Hurricane Sandy, where we made about 463 grants totaling $1.3 million. The first thing is speed counts. The need is real and immediate, and any support given to people both stops the bleeding, but also gives people hope, which is very important. For Hurricane Sandy, we had 4 separate panels, so no one group became too overwhelmed, and we had at least one panel meet every single week. And in the first round, we had the panels meet every day. That allowed us to make decisions quickly and get the money out fast. Keep it simple. People are stressed, so making it easy to apply is better for them and better for you as grant makers. Think about just the key questions you need to ask. For Sandy, we asked, what was the loss? Please provide any documentation and an artist resume. And I know some places, usually offering smaller grants of say $500, are not even asking for documentation. Make the guidelines crystal clear. And if you have the bandwidth, set up a separate email for eligibility questions. People who don't normally apply for grants will hear about this. And also people will hear through a grapevine, and they may not have been able to look at the guidelines. We just launched a grant with the Rauschenberg Foundation, which is not about COVID. It's about medical expenses. But because we have a line where people can email us with questions, I'm able to field all of that. So we're in fact not getting a lot of ineligible applications that are coming in. We're able to let people know, let people know via the email line. In addition to that, share opportunities. If you have specific disciplines, specific geographic regions for your grant, if you can let people know of other opportunities they can look at, it's enormously helpful. Again, on the email line that I've had for the Rauschenberg grant, I've given people a link to all of the COVID application information that we know about, and people are incredibly grateful to get that. The people most in need may be the least experienced in asking. People are scared and desperate, and sometimes the applications become overly emotional because people think they really need to plead their case. Sometimes people are angry and resentful that they need to be asking for help, and that comes out. Some people try to be very professional and take a just the facts approach, and so they seem a bit detached or perfunctory. And sometimes people are just all over the place. They're venting, they include a lot of extraneous information that you don't really need. People who never think of asking money will do so now. So be prepared for a wide variety of applications, and the normal grant writing protocols break down and are frequently just tossed out the window. Because of that, you need to have really clear decision-making criteria that is universally understood by panelists and evaluators. They need to be sympathetic, but also be able to navigate the wide variety of approaches and writing styles that are going to come in, and be able to fairly and equitably delineate based on the criteria. There may also be times when only a certain portion of what people are asking for is fundable, and that's fine. People would rather get partial funding than no funding at all. Also think about finance and infrastructure. You may be processing a lot more payments than you are used to. Do you have the capacity to do that? Can you do wire transfers? Can you do direct deposits? Just consider all of that. Decline people with dignity, and when possible, offer feedback. Since these are not typical artist grants, rejecting people feels like a fraught and complicated thing. Giving feedback about why they were declined can be incredibly helpful. It can mitigate certain anger that they may feel. It will let them know that there was a clear, specific process and a specific reason. And again, if you can refer them to other places, that's incredibly helpful. And finally, have short, medium, and long-term plans. What can you do immediately? How do things look for the grants you've already made in 2020 or may make in your next cycle? And what will the impact be on grants in 2021 and even 2022? This is a real opportunity for us to plan and think about what the landscape may look like over the next several years. So that's all I have. Thank you for doing this GIA, and I will now turn it over to the next person.
Hi, can you hear me? It's Laura. This is Laura Aden Packer. I'm the executive director of the Howard Gilman Foundation, which is based in New York City and funds the performing arts in New York City. I know a lot of my peer funders on this call, but I also am aware that a lot of our grantees are on the call. So I send greetings from our staff, and just to remind you that we are here for you if you want to give us a call or send us an email. So basically, I have here are primarily what we've already done, and so we're hoping that a lot of our fellow peer funders will be doing the same. The first thing that we did was we realized right away that our grantees were all working from home now, and they had no way, a lot of them, to communicate with one another. So we offered all of our grantees free Zoom licenses for the foreseeable future, so that they could have those video conferencing capabilities with their staff, board, artists throughout this time. And so far, more than half of our grantees have already taken us up on this offer. This was something that was really simple, not that expensive, and they were very, very grateful. So I recommend you look into doing that. Obviously, this is a time when everyone's nerves are totally frayed. So if you're able to assure your grantees as soon as possible about what their future funding looks like, you will be doing a great favor to them. We are letting all of our grantees know that they can anticipate receiving the same amount of general operating support from us in 2020 as they did in 2019. And that's sort of the least we can do for them. And notification of that has been able to give them a little bit of breathing room, knowing that they can expect to get at least what we gave them last year. Like everyone else, we are letting our grantees know that anything that they put into their last application to us is, off the board. I mean, we realize that all the shows that they were planning on doing when they submitted their proposals, whatever they said they were going to be doing, they're not going to be doing. And we just want to let them know that they can use those grant dollars for whatever they need during this crisis, especially, you know, retaining their artists and staff as best they can. What we've done with our current grant application, we have grants that are due in a couple of weeks. We've reached out to all those grantees who normally apply in this cycle and told them that we have discarded the grant application. Basically, we are only asking our grantees one question, which is, how is the COVID-19 virus impacting your organization? That's the only thing we're going to ask them. We're not asking them any of those other questions. And when our staff have our, you know, probably via Zoom site visits with our grantees, that's all we're really going to be talking to them about. So we've tossed out all the other questions. We want them to be able to answer one question, and they can submit this now on a rolling basis. We've just totally changed the way that we normally do it, changed deadlines, changed the application, all those things, the flexibility that our grantees need. For obviously, we primarily provide general operating support. Almost all of our grants are general operating support. And if, for my foundation colleagues, if your foundation does not currently make general operating support grants, now is the time to start doing that. We are converting whatever program grants we do have, which are not very many, but we do have some. We are speaking with our grantees about converting those to general operating support grants as well. We already have very minimal reporting requirements, but we would urge everyone to really loosen or eliminate a lot of the onerous reporting requirements that we put our grantees through. We're just planning on talking to our grantees when we do our, you know, probably, again, video conference site visits. We're just going to talk to them about what's been going on, and our staff will record the notes, and that will be their report. That will be the only kind of reporting that they need to do. Our foundation does not fund individual artists, and we are keenly and painfully aware of how this is just a tremendously awful time for individual artists. So we are looking for ways to get funds to them quickly through intermediaries and service organizations that we have worked with. For example, Dance NYC, an exemplar in the field, has already established a fund to provide immediate relief to dance workers and small dance companies. We have made a grant to them already, and I know a couple other foundations have as well. They're trying to put together you know, a nice pool of money there. So if you don't know about that, you can look into that with Dance NYC. And finally, I would say the most important thing is to convince your boards, if you are the person who has that ability, if you're the executive director, you know, that this is not the time to reduce the foundation's grant-making budget. This is not the time to say, well, you know, our endowments are, you know, falling apart and, you know, we're losing so much money. You know, I've heard a couple of foundations saying that, and that is just the wrong tack to take. And I'm glad to say that when we spoke with our trustees last night, you know, we made the case that, you know, our portfolio will come back. It's going to come back. It came back after 9/11. It came back after 2008, 2009. You know, our portfolio will come back. Now is not the time to cut our grant-making budget. And fortunately, you know, our board totally was 100% on board with that and recognized that the appeal to their, you know, that where we need to be making our investments now is with our grantees. And hopefully boards around the country will realize that this is not the time to reduce grant-making budgets, and in fact should be a time to consider increasing your grant-making budget. The last thing I'd say is we've gotten a lot of surveys. We know a lot of service organizations that are doing surveys, funders that are doing surveys. There are a million surveys, so I think everyone should sort of be sensitive to that and try and avoid duplication when at all possible. Our grantees are already totally overstressed, and I think the service organizations both nationally and regionally, and certainly for us here in the city, are doing a tremendous job of gathering information from artists and arts organizations. So hopefully, you know, we will be able to, data will help inform how we can continue to respond to the needs of our grantees during this unprecedented crisis. So thank you, Eddie, and all our friends over at GIA for putting this together, and thank you to all our colleagues in the funding community and in the nonprofit arts world that are on this call today. And we're thinking about everybody, and we're trying to do everything we possibly can. Thank you. We'll turn it over now to Randy. If you're off the phone, Mayor Randy.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. What a strange year this week has been. On Monday morning, I went to the Station Coffee Shop. It's the coffee shop in my neighborhood that I've gotten to every morning for the last 8 years, and Leona and Luis, who are the owners, we're in a state. This is eight hours after the restaurant ban went into effect here in Seattle, and there were handwritten signs about COVID-19, and there was Purell everywhere, and all the chairs were on top of all the tables. It was chaos. They had obviously been crying, and they were reckoning with losing everything. And when I looked to the left-hand side of the room, they had stockpiled a massive amount of food, and it said, "Take what you need." That is the city and the spirit and the community that we're fighting for right now, and we are fighting for our life. 9 days ago, the writer, author, leader, thinker, Shiro Ijeoma Oluo launched a GoFundMe page in Seattle, and it was the first beacon of light I saw in the last 3 weeks. And it was an artist using their platform not to help themselves, but to help other people. And I really think that it is in the DNA of our community to imagine the way out of this. Also 9 days ago, I was asked to write a messaging framework for the mayor and the cabinet for how we were going to move through this. The speed at which this crisis has hit us is unprecedented. In addition to the fact that it's 9/11 meets the recession, meets a natural disaster, it's also happening at just an astonishing speed. I designed this framework: clarify, mitigate, redeploy, recover, reimagine, as sort of a tent that we could organize our collective civic, public, community, and philanthropic efforts towards. 7 days ago, I was asked to step in as the sort of lead of philanthropy and civic recovery for the city of Seattle. 5 days ago, our office here at King Street Station became the relief and recovery headquarters for the Emergency Operations Center at the city. It's fascinating to manage a real-time disaster and practice social distancing because you can't use your emergency infrastructure in the way that it was designed. So we're doing it here, and we're doing what artists do, which is figuring it out in real time. Clarify is just all about an aligned public sector message that responds to the gravity of the situation. It is clear, it is transparent, it is accountable. We are collecting and continuously updating information so that the city knows how to respond. We are building solutions in real time, and we're keeping and maintaining a dashboard of what we're learning along the way. Information moves at the speed of trust, and so giving information to the paper isn't enough. We have to give information in language to trusted community leaders, and we have to trust each other. Mitigation is about how you get every dollar you can find out the door today. What are the short-term harm reduction strategies? And I could talk a little bit about that from both the citywide level, where we are pushing $5 million out the door in food vouchers, $2.5 million out the door for small business mitigation, and $1.5 million for our cultural and nonprofit community. And in the office, the way we're trying to do that short term is we gave $50,000 to Ijeoma's Artist Relief Fund. We gave another $50,000 to the Artist Trust, the statewide individual artist funder, to a previous presenter's point about finding the intermediaries that can do it quickly. We can fund individual artists, but we are dividing and conquering. We repurposed our $1 million cultural facilities fund and just went ahead and increased our general operating fund by 50%. No application, we're just amending everyone's contract and increasing the amount. They're going to get an email with how much that money is, how much that amount is, and then they can invoice us for the check. We are working with all of our local credit unions to secure zero-interest loans for individuals, contractors, and small businesses. We hope that that's the way that we can really leverage private support. We also convinced the city, well, we are the city. We convinced ourselves to forgive rent for everyone that rents space from us for 2 months. We signed a residential eviction ban, a commercial eviction ban for the next 2 months, So how can we keep people sheltered? Mitigation is really about immediate hierarchy of needs, which is food, shelter, now childcare, housing, and interestingly, culture. Because in this moment of social distancing, the impact of isolation is really profound, and we don't know how long we're going to be in this. Redeployment is an interesting space that the arts community has been very helpful in because it's about the rapid reskilling and the rapid redistribution of people and goods in almost an improvisational way. Can we put 1,000 laid-off restaurant workers to work delivering meals to vulnerable seniors who are unable to go to congregate meals? Can we put our special events production community, who are no longer allowed to produce special events, to work building mobile testing sites throughout the county when we have tests? We'll talk about that one offline. There's a lot of creativity and everybody wants to help, and setting up a framework by which we can triage that and essentially do matchmaking has been an important part of our strategy. But redeployment is kind of we're halfway between mitigation and redeployment right now. I will say I'm incredibly proud to live in a city that has a life science community that figured this out on their own, political leadership that responded with appropriate focus, and a community that chose to lean in and help neighbors. It's very inspiring to me. The big one is recover and reimagine. Recover means that we have to think about the restoration of this city at a scale that's never happened. We are going to have to remake our local economy, potentially our education system, certainly our local government, and everything is going to be different. We have a federal stimulus package that is assuming that we can somehow return to normal, but normal is gone. There is a new normal, and we get to build and create that. In 1971, the city of Seattle suffered the worst recession in its history. Boeing, the biggest employer in our city, laid off 65,000 employees, 65% of its workforce. There was a billboard next to Boeing Field that said, "Will the last person out of Seattle please turn out the lights?" And it was in that context in 1971 that the mayor chartered the Seattle Arts Commission, our local arts agency, our office. And when they asked the mayor why he would do that in a recession, he said, because we have to give people hope. And I think the thing our community is here to do right now in this moment, in this crisis, is to give the world hope. We need a strong civic narrative that's centered in our values. We have to respect the fact that we had an economy that didn't work for everyone before, so as we build a new one, we have to build it through a lens of racial equity, shared values, possibility, and creativity. When I think about advice to funders, think about mitigation as your program dollars and recovery and reimagination as your endowment dollars. Don't be precious about territory. Don't be precious about credit. It's all hands on deck all the time, and all of us have a role to play in this. And the last thing is just that distance doesn't equal isolation. They don't have to be the same thing. We need to find new ways to bring heart and creativity and passion and love and support for our neighbors in this time. We can't lose our humanity as we are forced to sort of create physical distance with one another. I am so confident that the creative community and the cultural community is going to lead us out of the woods. And I believe that because that's been the experience I've had for my 43 years on this planet. And I believe it because somehow I wound up in this role for civic reconstruction of our city. But mostly I just want to say before I jump off that I hope everyone is staying safe. I hope you are articulating to those you love that you do. And we've got each other. We are in this together, and I'm confident that we can do it. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. My name is DéLana, R.A. Dameron. I am a founder of Red Olive Creative Consulting and Black Art Futures Fund, and I'm super excited about the ways that my colleagues here have articulated what they've already done and are interested in doing, and I'm honored to be in a position to speak towards the chorus of deep thinking and movement making. I'm going to speed through my bullet points, which are sketches and diagrams. that if you can't see it on your screen, I apologize. I'll describe a little bit, but hopefully you'll have a chance to see these later. I hope you enjoyed the art that I brought to the conversation today. I'm a South Carolina-based fundraising consultant for small arts nonprofits across the country when I'm not distributing funds for Black Art Futures Fund, which is a volunteer collective project, or serving as my role as board chair for Recess, a social justice-based art organization in Brooklyn. In this work over the last month as a fundraising consultant, and even still this year, I've been chasing grant deadlines with my clients, trying to push folks to understand as best as they can to take care of themselves first. What I mean by this is that folks right now are putting emotional, mental, and financial resources into grant writing. I understand in some respects the intention could be well-meaning, right? Like advocating for folks for future money. However, even the emotional and psychological space our groups have to occupy to even answer any future-leaning questions should be considered at this moment. And as the crisis heightened, this work highlighted for me as an arts funder with Black Art Futures Fund how futile applying for grants right now for 21 and 22 feels, right? How could groups be able to focus how could groups be able to focus on its most valuable asset, its people? A question I was thinking of is how can we think so far ahead when the government does not even know what's in store for any of us? And how can we alleviate this tension? I took these questions to the board of Black Art Futures Fund, and our applications were already in the middle of our funding cycle, which was 2 phases, and even if we believed it was an easy application, said we had to stop this process. We needed to redirect, we needed to create an emergency grant fund and empty out the bucket that we had. What would have been a May-June funding announcement date turned into moving upwards of $35,000 in the next 2 weeks, which is our full fund right now. We sent it out on Tuesday night of this week, and as of this webinar, we've already received $24,000 in funding requests, all from orgs with a budget of less than $300,000 all across the country. This moment allowed for us to practice Occam's razor theory, right? The simplest answer to a complicated moment or question is probably the right one. Occam's razor for us on this call could be thinking about what we might be able to do. And this first slide says, move as many resources as we can quickly, right? We at Black Art Futures Fund are in an active discussions with some foundations and welcome conversations with us to act as intermediaries to be able to get necessary philanthropic funds to the small arts community. The little triangle and the next thing is my version of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's needed for me to be able to exercise my Occam's razor, right, for most questions. When I think about philanthropy in this work, I think before we ask what's next, maybe we can ask organizations, what do you need now? And maybe that's the only question. It's probably money to secure health, food, shelter, and security, right, at the bottom of the pyramid for its people. Once that's done, organizations can continue up the pyramid and often provide all of the other components, right? Community, even if it's virtually, belonging, and still spaces for creativity, even as we are in a crisis flexion point. The grant that I spoke about that's due Friday from my client has asked us yesterday to articulate a plan of action for summer or fall. This funder started this conversation with a caveat even that there is no guarantee for future funding and still asking the group to use its limited resources on a timeline that no one can speak to right now. This funder has supported this organization for several years in the past, and I just can't understand an equation that continues to ask organizations to occupy the top of the pyramid of self-actualization and realization without ensuring, especially now in this crisis, that the people who will do the things, administer the grant, run the organization, have what they need. And that's near to the bottom. One of the images in the next image is the image. The image of the bell curve defines this COVID moment for us and asks us to do very uncomfortable things, right? How do we flatten the curve of the epidemic? How do we flatten the curve of this impending crisis, right? This art and culture impending crisis. And I think to flatten that curve, or we have to shelter in place, right? Social distance. And in the work of philanthropy, one of the things that we can do is that influx the field with generous operating support from funders. It's also super important that we communicate quickly, even if the executable plan is not perfect. Our weight increases our organization's anxiety. I'm of the belief that this is not the time for us at Black Art Futures Fund, right, to let the perfect be the enemy of just sending an email with updates and opportunities to move resources and money as soon as possible. My cursive writing, right, so asks us to consider converting all programs related support immediately to generous operating support. And I refer back to my Maslow's cultural philanthropic hierarchy of needs. There are simply no programs, no art, and now I'm thinking of the art holding us up right now in this moment, even virtually, without the bottom of the pyramid secure. We have asked the field to exist in the 10 to 20% of administrative margins for way too long. And what if our radical response was to do this differently, provide generous operating support now, and maybe continue that into our new reality? And finally, if not us in the philanthropic space, who? Truly, the other revenue streams, right, individuals for the most part, earned income, et cetera, just can't intervene right now. Again, I think about all of the art, how art will help us get through this, and art will document, and art will help us make sense of all of this later, maybe. When we study ancient civilizations, I think about how we look at their art and their culture, and we have the resources to make sure groups are with us on the other side of this. We have to want to save it, though, take risks, and then reflect. Right now, I am fully stepping in, and I urge my colleagues to understand that we are the emergency response team for the field. I'm thinking of how medical response teams are moving on autopilot, Occam's razor showing up again, and trying to ensure that the highest population of individuals make it through this crisis, right? So this requires doctors and nurses to act first, understanding that instinct and reflexes are pushing them into that action, not necessarily reason. Reason asks us to pause and to hesitate. Think about how we can flatten the curve of this particular crisis in the field, and I hope that we can act swiftly and together. And I'll stop there. Thank you so much for your time.
Hi, y'all. This is Caitlin Strokosch from the National Performance Network. The National Performance Network, otherwise known as NPN, is a hybrid grantmaker association and movement builder focused on advancing racial and cultural justice in the nonprofit performing arts field. Our work supports artists directly in partnership with the organizations in our network, and supports artists particularly in the creation and touring of new original work. We also work to build the capacity, particularly for organizations of color, and advocate for more artist and community-centered practices in our field overall. While we are a national funder, providing resources in almost every state in the country, we are based in New Orleans, in a community that is no stranger to crisis. I just have a few bullet points, and I'll try to move quickly, especially because some of my colleagues have already said so many of these things better than I'm sure I will. In thinking about our short-term actions right now and setting priorities, one of the questions I think has helped us in guiding our response is, what is our organization poised to do particularly well? I think in a time like this, we all want to do everything for everyone. And it's been important for us to take a moment to pause and remember what it is each of us does really well. So for us, there are three particularly salient points. One is offering stability and certainty. NPN has long-term relationships with organizations and artists who count on us for annual support. Those relationships are at the core of everything we do. So ensuring that some of our funding deadlines and some of our funding mechanisms are moving forward is particularly important for us to communicate right now, as Laura said as well. So for example, the commissioning fund deadline that we had already scheduled for May is moving forward so that organizations and artists who do have plans underway for next year can feel like not everything is up in the air. Obviously with the caveat as well that we will be adapting and be flexible to what those programs actually look like. Another way we're thinking about the stability that we can offer is making sure that artists get paid for projects we were expecting to fund, even if those projects are canceled or postponed. One of the other things I think we do particularly well, or we're poised to do, is to leverage our intermediary relationship. So NPN was founded to foster reciprocity and artist and community-centered practices in performing arts presenting. So we're used to serving as an intermediary in the relationships between artists and arts organizations, whether that means assisting with contract negotiations, setting equitable fee structures, offering expectations around community engagement guidelines, things like that. So most of the grants that we provide to organizations are specifically allocated for artist fees. So the fact that we are encouraging the organizations to continue to pay those artists regardless of whether those projects are canceled or postponed right now is a position that we're used to being in. And I think recognizing when we as funders can leverage that relationship is really important. Also encouraging those organizations to find other ways to get money into the hands of artists right now. For example, can you reimburse now for travel expenses that artists have already incurred for performances that may not happen, so that artists aren't carrying that debt even for things that are going to be rescheduled. Also, as many folks have also already mentioned, cutting down on bureaucracy. NPN is relatively small and nimble, and we're doing what we can, along with so many of you others, to mobilize resources quickly. I think it's a good time to ask what processes really matter. What processes really matter now, and also what processes really matter after a crisis? Do we really need to be as bureaucratic as we are sometimes? So for example, we awarded 40 plus new grants last month before this crisis, and we're accelerating the contract process for those grants so we can get money out the door as quickly as possible for those funds. In the longer term, I'm thinking about how we do not just go back to normal. If you had me on video, you would see normal in air quotes enthusiastically. NPN works towards system change in arts and philanthropy, and I think these kinds of moments are when systems of inequity can either become even more entrenched or they can be disruptive for positive change. So one notion that really underscores all of our work is to center racial and cultural justice, not just in a crisis, but every day. Inequities are amplified in a crisis, even when they sometimes become less visible because it seems like everybody is struggling. So whether racial justice is at the core of our everyday work or not, I think we can start from where we stand right now in this moment. Lots of folks have talked about trust-based philanthropy, and it's a notion I think we as funders are more comfortable with in a crisis, but how can we make trust-based practices part of our work all the time and trust the lived experiences of individuals and communities who experience oppression and trauma daily? The second long-term notion we're thinking about is how do we support artistic programming and capacity all the time? This moment is a perfect example of why GenOps support is so important. And as NPN support is primarily for artistic programming, we're really thinking through how we can change some of our funding structures that support the overall resiliency of our constituents all the time. And the last thing that we've been talking a bit about here at NPN is, in particular, how do we challenge the performing arts presenting model overall? What does it mean that our work focuses on a model of travel and in-person performances, not only in the face of a pandemic, but also what does this mean in forces like climate change, nationalistic and racist travel bans, detention and deportation, and limited accessibility for people with disabilities or for remote, rural, and tribal communities? How do we deeply invest in real engagement and exchange that is not just about face-to-face? Not only all the really amazing virtual stuff that's happening right now in a crisis, but all the time. Artists shouldn't be limited to only sharing their work on a stage, nor should any community's access to the live arts and artists be limited by access to a performance in person. I'm really grateful to GIA and for all of our colleagues here for the leadership in this moment, and we'll turn this over to Christine.
Hi everyone. I really want to thank GIA and Eddie for convening this group and express gratitude to all the speakers. I've been taking furious notes. I'm Christine Yoon, Senior Program Officer for the Arts at Wallace. I'm also co-chair for the New York City chapter of Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and Philanthropy. And I'm going to pick up on the quote that Caitlin just said, inequities are amplified in a crisis. I'm here to talk about three things. First is the scapegoating of AAPIs and people of Chinese heritage in particular. While the origin of COVID-19 has been traced to China, let's be clear, the virus is not race-based. But like every other time before this, fear fueled by xenophobia and racism is surfacing and spreading more quickly than the virus itself. Just like after 9/11, we saw anti-Muslim violence spike, Asian Americans went from being a model minority back to being the yellow peril. All of this is rooted in anti-Blackness, and none of this is helpful or excusable in any light. And a couple quick anecdotes. Our own president and some elected officials refer to the coronavirus as the Chinese virus and Kung flu. Media outlets are using photos of Asians wearing face masks as the visual spread of this virus when it's impacting all people. In the UK, a Vietnamese art curator was dropped from an art fair because they feared she would be seen as carrying the virus. All over this country, Asian Americans, adults, and children are experiencing hate-based situations. Earlier today, I learned that in New York alone, there were over 1,000 reported hate crimes in recent weeks. My second point, coronavirus affects us all, and it makes some of us even more vulnerable. And I'll talk about immigrants, women, and the census. Immigrants are on the front lines of this crisis. Many are unable to work from home in the jobs that they hold, or they work for Asian-owned businesses that have already been forced to close. Worse, immigrants are at risk of deportation, being denied green cards. Even citizens can be at risk for being denaturalized based on the public charge rule that went into effect, which is about whether people are using public benefits such as Medicaid. The public charge rule went into effect at the same time as the coronavirus was evidently spreading in the U.S. Women are impacted differently, particularly low-wage workers, and the majority of whom are women of color. 75% of healthcare workers are women who are on the front lines of this virus, and women make up 90% of home care workers. These people are at greater risk of exposure to the virus with less opportunity to care for themselves and their families. And here I want to give a quick shout out to an AAPI leader, Ai-jen-poo, and her people at the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And you can find out more at domesticworkers.org. Lastly, I know we've all been talking about there's the immediate crisis right now, and then we'll come out of this into a more longer-term crisis. The virus throws a wrench into our best efforts to organize around the census, and it's making the hard-to-reach people that much harder to reach. When we come out of this first urgent phase of the pandemic, the census figures will add to a longer-term inequitable phase for our communities of color and for AAPIs in particular. So third, what can we do in this rapidly changing climate? Number one, practice anti-racism. I know this is something that we all do daily, but I wanted to say proactively remind ourselves and others to not project fears of coronavirus onto marginalized groups and spread unfounded associations. Number two, solidarity matters. Be an ally. Speak out against racially charged aggressions or outbreak-related jokes that perpetuate stereotypes. And lastly, what many of us are doing already, reaching out to grantees and impacted communities. In addition to asking how grantees are doing and asking about their finances, also check to see if they are experiencing racial profiling. And if you don't have grantees whose work today are focused specifically within AAPI communities, there are plenty of organizations that can help direct you, including APIP chapters spread across the country can direct you to community-based organizations in communities that you care most about. And remember that prevention and intervention options are not always equitably distributed across the workforce, and disparities are often cut along racial and gender lines, with women bearing the brunt of burdens. I rushed through what I wanted to say, but I will end with this. I believe our health is strengthened by our humanity, and I really believe that the arts brings out our common shared humanity. So I just wanted to end with saying that common sense, goodwill, definitely art, and humanity are the best remedies to heal us all.
Hi everyone, thank you so much to our presenters. That was awesome. You leave our attendees with lots of information to replicate in terms of funding practices, ways to better relieve grantees, and to do this with a social justice lens in order to minimize racism in the process. And so now we'll start with our Q&A with our presenters. So if you have a question, please be specific about who the question is for. And just a reminder to ask your questions in either the rectangular box at the bottom of your screen if you're joining us from Adobe Connect, or in the comment box if you are joining from Facebook. So Randy, and any other LAAs from the City of San Jose Office of Cultural Affairs, this question's for you, would love to hear from other grant makers of public funds whose funding comes 100% from the TOT. Our funding base is obviously going to take a significant hit for fiscal year 2020 to 2021. Can any other city LAAs here respond? So if you can just offer some thoughts, Randy, to that question.
Sure. Our county, I assume that's lodging tax, the TAA. Our office is funded through an admissions tax, which is down 40% and dropping because you can't buy tickets to anything, ergo you can't have any admissions tax. But that's no better than the general fund, which is supported by sales tax, and also you can't buy anything except at grocery stores. So, I mean, when I said the new normal, I think that's part of what I was talking about. Even when this pandemic is over, we're going to be able to go back outside, and there are no cruise ships, there are no conferences, there are no tourists in the hotels. There's a very urgent moment on the other side of this where when I say we're going to have to recreate our economy, I'm not being hyperbolic. I think we're going to have to really drive folks back out into community when we're able to be on the other side of this. And so the impact on lodging tax, sales tax, all public sector resources is probably going to be extremely severe. Ergo, we're going to have some pretty bold strategies. My intent, just to be really candid, is around this civic recovery concept to try to raise like something on the magnitude of $10 billion.
Great, and that's awesome. Thank you. And I hope everyone can hear me now, so just let me know if you can't. And so our next question, this is for anyone who's presenting here. So can funders think about universal applications shared across grant makers? And is this a strategy that funders would consider to truly ease stress on grantees? How feasible is that type of a strategy? Anyone can dive in, or multiple can share.
Hi everyone, this is DéLana. One of the things that I think that might be universal for folks who have multi-year funding practices, and even if they have grantees within the multi-year cycle, is to just initiate the next cycles, right? And so not having them go through the application process again, but like really truly thinking about what are the barriers to moving the money, and how can we lessen them. Yeah.
Great. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
This is
Before
Laura.
we move to our next question? Okay, go for it.
Okay. I was just going to say that, a lot of this varies from foundation to foundation because of their boards. But, our board was fine with us just asking that one question, how is COVID-19 impacting your organization? And I think that's all we really need to know right now from our teams. And so most of the other questions in any application that any foundation currently uses is pointless, I think, at the moment. So I would encourage, all the funders out there to consider just totally streamlining your application to ask basically that one question.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. And say the main question one more time. You were a little soft. I want to make sure I can repeat it for our listeners.
The question?
Okay. Well, there was one main question that you said that our attendees should.
Well, our question was, how is the COVID-19 crisis impacting your organization? That's our question to our grantees going forward.
Okay. Great. Awesome. Okay, thank you. So we heard that one main question, keeps it nice and easy, nice and simple. And also, Laura, I know a few people are looking for the link for the free Zoom account, so we'll follow up with you on that one.
Well, any of our grantees,
yeah.
That can contact us, and we'll get back to them with that information ASAP.
Great, thanks. Okay. So another question from our listeners, what are some strategies to mitigate the crisis shaping up with performers unions? This person submitted this question via Facebook and said, I heard the recommendation that an equity frame should not consider COVID-19 a major event and is insisting that theaters pay out 4-week contracts to keep their members paid. But theaters can't afford this. They don't have this kind of cash flow. What are your thoughts? Anyone can dive in here. Maybe Caitlin or Sansan, if you have thoughts.
This is Caitlin. We're all in a bind, and I think as funders, it's important for us to leverage what we can. We can't just ask our institutional grantees to go ahead and make those payments to artists if we aren't willing to step up into that space ourselves. Sure. So I think that's a really important thing. I think also, like I had mentioned, trying to encourage folks to meet halfway somewhere in some way. For example, like reimbursing for expenses that artists have already incurred that they're now carrying debt on their credit cards. Just figuring out some different kinds of payment schedules. I think it's the fact that folks are just taking, some folks are taking an either-or approach and invoking force majeure clauses, and artists aren't getting anything for work that's already been done. I think that we as funders need to figure out how to step into that space. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay, great. Sansan, did you want to share anything? All right, okay. So another question. So a lot of funders and a lot of people in general, as we know, are sort of checking the pulse and seeing what grantees are really asking for, what do grantees really need. And the response is often GOS, general operating support, cash, that's the major need. But have any of you heard of anything beyond GOS that grantees are asking for frequently that folks on the webinar could benefit from knowing about?
This is Christine.
This is Randy. One thing that I know people are looking for is work. So in that rapid redeployment, because all the schools are closed, we are hiring teaching artists using education dollars to build streaming content that parents can use at home to educate their kids while they are home from school. Similarly to that redeployment strategy around special event producers building testing sites. People want general operating support, but they also want to contribute. They want to do something, and they want to work. So how can we use other dollars from other places to put people to work in a unique
Great, thanks, Randy. And Christine, I think you also wanted to respond to that one.
Hi, this
Yeah,
is DéLana.
I wanted to underscore what Sansan opened up with about open lines of communication. That's something that I've heard as well. Sorry, so now I'm speaking for my Wallace role and not my APIP role. It's something that I've heard as well. Grantees know that we are trying to move as quickly and as flexibly as we can, but quick for us is not a few days. But at the same time, what I'm hearing is just appreciation for knowing that I'm over here, I'm thinking of them, and I'm willing to listen to them, even if I can't, I'm not in a position to offer anything concrete right now.
Great, thank you. And DéLana, I think you also wanted to contribute something.
Yeah, I think it's a general question. Kind of the phrase of like people are looking for work, or trying to think through like the ways in which the field has been asked to continue to perform in order to have the money keep flowing, right? Like people thinking that like if they show some level of productivity, then like they can earn their keep, which means that like money could still flow in their direction. And I wonder if it's really just about like the access or the proximity to the resources through work, right? Work is tied to the acquisition of those resources. So just kind of just want to throw that out into the ether as a question.
Thank you. Sansan, I think you wanted to share something as well.
Thank you, Shanlin. I guess for me, I think that what we've been hearing is that people may have some funds, they're not necessarily sure how to deploy them well right now, given that there's so much coming at them. And so what we're finding is that they're asking for help in terms of expert consultants to just sort of walk through cash flow, emergency planning, those kinds of efforts so that they know what they need to pay attention to this moment, what they next need to pay attention to next week, and what they can pay attention to the week after. So we're finding that our folks are being overwhelmed in some ways by the emergency that they have from so many different places, boards, staff, constituency. So I think that that calm voice that funders can play or that consultants can play actually would be really, we're finding is going to be really helpful.
Thank you, Sansan. And that actually leads to the next question. You sort of answered it from your, just now in your response. This question came in and says, in researching emergency funding, I find that many are not being distributed competitively, but rather on a first-come, first-served basis. I have not done this before. I'm concerned about fairness, communication divides, and technology divides. And you mentioned consultants, Sansan, so thank you for bringing that up. But does anyone else have anything additional that they would like to share that has been helpful to them in addition to consulting? So then while, go for
there
it.
are, specifically on the granting side, I know there are organizations that CERF Plus has partnered with and are doing revamping their either current emergency relief protocols or establishing relief funds. I know Springboard for the Arts, for instance, has set up so you want to start an emergency relief fund. Here are the things you need to consider. And certainly that what the question addresses is addressed in some of that. And also just, as an organization that's been granting for a long time, certainly these are questions that we're asking ourselves throughout this process as we evaluate what the needs are and where the resources will be able to meet that. And happy to talk to anyone offline about that.
Thank you, James, for mentioning Springboard for the Arts. And so, yeah, the National Endowment for the Arts and Americans for the Arts have great online resource centers as well. And local and regional funders are sharing some local resource lists, which is great. And so those resources are available. And I would like to continue on with the next question. We've got a few minutes. So is there one, and this might be a tougher question, I think, but is there an equity framework based on need, lack of access, and resources? And I know that we have the resources that are online that I just mentioned, but if anyone else wants to comment on that question. Okay. All right. Well, I will continue on. Another question from our listeners. To establish a new normal as driven by art, can the large arts community foundations use their social media and press to create events that show that the arts makes a difference as part of the new norm? Aside from doctors addressing COVID-19, can we leverage media to get the art story out there? Anyone want to respond to that specifically?
This is Caitlin from NPN. I think there are a lot of great examples of how folks are doing kind of virtual promotions of things, virtual festivals, and as I mentioned, for us, since the work that we were founded to do was support the touring of artists, it's a fundamental thing that we really need to challenge right now, whether that is right in a pandemic or right in the face of climate change or any of those other things. So one of the things NPN is doing is we just reached out to all the artists that we fund and asked them to send us what they're working on right now or to tag us on social media, and we're going to start creating a kind of virtual, not festival, but just a lot more promotion virtually than we might normally do, and a lot more stuff that's in process, and thinking about the ways that we can support the stories that artists are telling, not just finished work that they may have ready to show, but just getting to know them and what their work is about, what their ideas are, and how their practice is changing in these times. So I think, again, just being really adaptive. We have so many incredible technology platforms for doing that right now, and again, to do that all the time and not just in a crisis like now.
Thanks, Caitlin. Any final thoughts from our presenters before we wrap up? All right. Okay, well, we are to the end of our session, but before we go, I would like to thank all of our presenters who did such an awesome job. And as we all know, all of the presentations and resources have been turned around so quickly, and so really extend the biggest thank you on behalf of GIA for you carving out time to be here with us, and for all of you who attended. Today's presentation has been recorded, so those of you who are listening in, or even those of you who registered and weren't able to physically make it, you will receive a copy of the recording as well as slides from the presentation. And if there are any other questions that you have, we can continue to work together to get these answers to you within the GIA community, so continue to send questions our way. In follow-up to this, we invite you to take a brief survey just to let us know what you're doing to relieve communities and support your grantees for those of you who are funders. And as I said, if you have further questions, feel free to reach out to us. And thank you for joining us. I hope you all have a lovely, safe, and healthy day. Bye.